who's behind the mask.
Yours truly, Brevin Thompson, is back. And back to continue our series of Spider-Man reviews leading up to Spider-Man No Way Home, which is coming out later in December if it's not delayed. Fingers crossed. And this time, since we're continuing on with the Sam Raimi series, we're at the best of the bunch, which is Spider-Man 2, once again directed by Sam Raimi. And back when this came out back in 2004, even before it came out, when they started releasing the trailers, I was really ready for this movie. I remember back seeing the trailer for this movie. I was so excited because I loved the first one as a kid very much, and I was very hyped for the sequel. And since then, Spider-Man 2 has always been one of my favorite superhero films, and the reason why it's the film that really captures like what it would be like for someone to be Spider-Man. I mean, it captures. It really got what really got right was what the first film really didn't really focus on is Peter balancing his life. I mean, as like as a regular college student, and his life as Spider-Man, and I think this film in particular really just captures that well because it really fleshes out Peter Parker's character a bit more, and that's really that's one of the few things that I like about Spider-Man 2. And since then, since I was 6, I've always loved Spider-Man 2, and it's by far the best Spider-Man film that we've gotten so far in terms of live action. And I mean, when it comes to my favorite Spider-Man movies, it's mostly this as well as Into the Spider-Verse. So I'm very glad with what we got here. So, what was, how did you like first experience back then, and how do you feel about it now?
Well, as far as first experience goes, back then, you see, like I had said before, I was very young when they all came out back then, and memories for it on my end are a little fuzzy, but I do remember that just like you, I was insanely hyped for the whole thing. In fact, when they were getting ready to release the movie, I saw all the posters, and even as a kid was standing right by that poster that is behind us right now, and just real excited for when the movie was going to come out in theaters. I just was ready to go. And when it came out, I remember just being cheerful as heck and having a lot of impact on me, as well as I'm sure it did everybody else.
Yeah, because, I mean, back then, this was my Dark Knight. I mean, a lot of people have, like, their top 10, like, favorite list of, like, comic book movies, and I would be, like, very surprised if they didn't add this onto the list because of how great it is.
Yeah, personally, I think that it deserves to be up there with them because in terms of Spider-Man movies, this one not only got the best record money-wise at the box office, but it really has, in my opinion, quite the story to tell about balancing a double life as well as trying to manage what's really important to you, professional and personal-wise, living both lives throughout.
Yeah, because that's kind of like what this film does. I mean, he finds out it's not really easy being a superhero while you're trying to balance your normal life. In this movie, he's late for class, he's getting fired from his jobs, and it's just like, nothing is going right for Peter Parker in this movie, and throughout the film, you really feel sorry for him, and in a way, this can, a lot of people can relate to his problems.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned before, Spider-Man is easily like the one comic book character that anybody can possibly relate to.
Yes, and I still believe that quite strongly to this day, for so many reasons. But at the same time, I think this movie does a very good job of showing that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and Sam Raimi, I thought, captured that pretty well, and I think that's why he was the perfect choice to be the director for this series.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. And there, as I recall, there were a lot of people who either auditioned or were like candidates to do this sort of thing, as we, I think, kind of mentioned in the last video. But at the same time, the fact that Sam Raimi got the job, I think we should all count ourselves very lucky.
Oh yeah, definitely, and especially since Tobey Maguire came back, especially when he had a back injury when he was filming Seabiscuit, he almost couldn't return for Spider-Man 2, and Jake Gyllenhaal was going to replace him. But thankfully, Tobey came back. And speaking of Jake Gyllenhaal, he would get involved in a Spider-Man movie somehow, playing Mysterio in Far From Home.
Yeah, and I think personally, in terms of his role for that movie, he did a very good job. Even had me fooled for a while on whether or not Mysterio was the villain of the movie, but
Yeah,
it was.
more on that later.
Yeah. Anyway, one scene that I personally really enjoyed starting out was the beginning of the film where.
Yeah, we got like,
one.
I mean, we got like a brief recap of the first movie in art form, and it's very beautiful, and it's one of my favorite intros for a comic book movie, and it's like, this is like anything that this is like nothing I've ever seen before in terms of like superhero movies. I mean, at the time, they were mostly viewed as a joke, but I mean, the early Marvel movies, I mean, they be kind of like from good to decent to not so great.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this came out like, in 2004. It was a good. It was a decent year for comic book movies. I would say like the only bad comic book movie that we got back in 2004 was possibly Catwoman, and but in terms of Marvel movies, in terms of like Marvel film series, the best that we had back then was mostly Spider-Man and X-Men.
Yeah.
So yeah, but this intro, you had the artwork recap as well as Danny Elfman's score. I really love what Danny Elfman has managed to do for these two films. It's a shame of what happened. What kind of experience that he had with Sam Raimi working on this movie, which is why he didn't return for Spider-Man 3. And thankfully, they settled their differences and rekindled their friendship, in later years. But before I get any further into the review, we have Rachel from Rachel's Reviews. This is the first review that she's done with me on this channel since E.T. I'm very happy to have her back on this channel to talk about Spider-Man 2. But before we go any further, I want to hear what she has to say. Now to you, Rachel.
Hi, everybody. My name's Rachel Wagner, and I've been asked by Brevin to share my thoughts on Spider-Man 2. And him and Cameron have been working really hard and doing these Spider-Man reviews, and I'm really excited to be able to participate. Well, Spider-Man 2 is one of my favorite comic book movies. I think it does such a good job in not only telling a fun story with action and superhero antics, but it also has really good character building, which I think separates it from a lot of the other superhero movies. And in this movie, you have, of course, Peter that is coming to a crossroads with whether he wants to be Spider-Man or not, and what is he going to do? And is he going to commit to Mary Jane, or is he going to commit to the city and saving people? And the stress that has on him causes him to lose his powers at points. I think that whole dynamic really works, and you can definitely feel for Peter and his struggle to know what is best for him in his life and how much of himself he should give to the people that he's serving. I think that all works very, very well and makes him a compelling hero and a compelling character. I also think the Doc Octopus is a great character. His motivations are so clear because of the death of his wife and his grief and what has happened to his body and him him being angry and upset. I think that all makes sense for his character, and you feel for it. It's not just some like random evil guy. I think that he's great. Alfred Molina is so good in the role, and I think that him and Tobey Maguire have some really good sequences together. Of course, everybody talks about the train sequence, which is still holds up. Is still a really great action set piece. Is very good, and I think that the special effects, all this, the web slinging and everything, all still looks really great. And overall, it's a superhero movie that has a ton of heart. It's got a ton of action. It's got characters with motivation. So I think it has everything that you want in a superhero movie. And it's still definitely one of my favorites. So thanks so much for giving me a chance to talk about this film. And I hope you have great luck with the rest of the review and the rest of the series. So thanks so much, everybody. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.
And right after that amazing opening, we get Peter delivering pizza. And honestly, onto this subject, it was one of my favorite things to do in the movie-based video game. I mean, and when it comes to that, I mean, there's side missions where you get to deliver pizzas. And I've always loved doing that, and it's one of my favorite. It's been one of my favorite games when I was a kid.
Yeah, growing up for me, it really was like an interesting little mini game. You know, you had to deliver the pizza without doing too many flips, and if you did,
you would mess up the pizza.
Yeah, as Mr. Aziz put it, if you did it that way, people would get deliveries like the pizza fell from the sky.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Joe's 29-minute guarantee is a promise, man. I know to you, Parker, a promise means nothing, but to me, it's serious.
It's serious to me too, Mr. Aziz.
Yeah, and one, of course he's late because he saved some kids about to be from getting hit by a truck. And one of those kids actually is Peyton List, who's Tori from Cobra Kai. And I was like, I had to look that up. I was like, oh my god, that's Tori from Cobra Kai. And that really surprised me.
Yeah, it surprised me too, personally. I just didn't really think it was her the first time. She seemed...
Yeah, and we even get a one little small cameo of like one guy trying to eat a pizza, who's actually Scott Spiegel, who wrote Evil Dead 2. Well, he gets fired from his job as a pizza delivery driver. And we see that he's really struggling with balancing his life. I mean, he's getting fired from his jobs. I mean, he's failing in his class. And he's even, like, having some fallouts with the people closest to him. I mean, we have, like, Harry, played again by James Franco. He's desperate to find Spider-Man because he still thinks that Spider-Man's responsible for the death of his father.
And keep in mind that this film actually takes place about 2 years after the original one. So the fact that he's still on the hunt for Spider-Man, I think, really says a lot. In my opinion, he's really just going to keep trying until he supposedly honors his father's death, even though we kind of know otherwise.
Yeah. And when it comes to Peter and his relationship with MJ, I mean, he desperately wants to be with her and at the same time wants to stay as far away from her because he's afraid of what will happen to her if his enemies ever find out his identity.
Yeah, that's the toughest part, in my opinion, about being a superhero, because you want to do right in the world, but you also want to protect the people you care about the most, and you can't even tell them that it was you doing all those things because, like you said, it would put them at risk. You know, you inherit the mask, you inherit the enemies too, so
yeah.
For me, it's like, it must be like a really painful process, but I understand why they do it, and I'm real glad that Peter takes that into account every time that he looks at it.
And very much like the first movie, Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, I mean, they still have excellent chemistry.
Yeah, I honestly cannot think, in terms of chemistry-wise, better actors to portray their respective characters.
Yeah.
It was a real nice choice between the two of them.
It definitely was. when Peter comes home, we get easily some of the best supporting characters in this trilogy. I really love these characters. I mean, especially Mr. Dickovich, who always pesters Peter for his rent money.
Yeah,
Hey.
I mean,
Hey,
seriously.
what's that? Can I spend it? Sorry, he doesn't pay the rent, and don't seek past me. I got ears like a cat and eyes like a rodent. It's just so goddamn hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, really. It's nice that he got a bit of a. I think he got a bit more of a heartfelt appearance more.
In Spider-Man 3.
But I truly enjoyed his, like, Spider-Man 2 appearance. I thought it was a nice. Thought it was a nice little comedy relief, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, because the movie does have like moments of comedy, especially the scenes with Jameson.
Yeah, I mean, really.
Yeah, and still, J.K. Simmons is just great as always as that character.
Yeah, couldn't think of a better person to take that role.
Well, of course not. But some of the best casting for a supervillain, in my opinion, is Alfred Molina as Otto Octavius. I can't imagine anybody else playing this character as well as he did, and he really nailed the role of Otto Octavius. I mean, being a scientist who Peter admires, and when we first are introduced to him, he seems like the perfect role model and friend to Peter. And we get like this one scene with him being introduced to Peter alongside his wife, and it's very important when it comes to later on in the end, when we'll get to later. And he like has like this heartfelt moment. Peter has this like heartfelt moment with Otto and his wife, and it really makes us care about Otto. I mean, especially what happens later and what happens at the end of the film.
When it comes to Alfred Molina as Doc Ock, I also agree with Brevin that I could not think of a better person to portray this character in a realistic film. He really nailed it all the way home. In my opinion, it's really great, the scene that we get when we're first introduced to him. He talks to him for a sec, and Peter tells him that he's trying to write a paper on nuclear fusion. Otto says, "Better's not good enough, Peter. You have to work hard. Intelligence is not a privilege, it's a gift. You use it for the good of mankind." And I, for one, thought that that was one of the best inspirational quotes in the entire film. Don't you agree?
Yeah, and that comes into play like later at the end.
Yeah, and we'll get more to that a bit later, but...
Yeah, and right when Peter is on his way to see MJ's play, I mean, he of course is late because he's caught up in Spider-Man and stuff. I mean, he has to stop a group of bank robbers, and I really liked this moment with him and Bruce Campbell. And even though my favorite cameo of Bruce Campbell in this trilogy is mostly his one in Spider-Man 3, and even in the extended cut, I mean, it makes it a bit hilarious.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
really, there's just...
Shoelace, you might want to... Can I help you? He's just so perfect. I mean, Bruce Campbell, I mean, he's great. I love the shit out of this guy, especially mostly in the Evil Dead trilogy.
And I really enjoyed the part he got to play in that. People say that the way he is in that one probably is like some kind of Easter egg to when he was considered to play Mysterio at some point.
Yeah, especially when he's like, "I'm sorry, no one will see it after the doors are closed. It helps maintain the illusion." Yeah, and even at one point in one of the drafts that they were making for Spider-Man 4 at the time would have had Bruce Campbell appearing as Mysterio.
Yes, I actually read about that, and it shows as sort of like a SketchUp, a concept in that profile. It shows him under his later life tab, where he is seen as Spider-Man trying to stop Mysterio from robbing a bank, and later he goes home to MJ. It's really interesting took place after the events of the third film, but they never got it into production because the fourth film got canceled.
Yeah, that's a huge shame. I mean, I would have wanted to see that, but I mean, of course, that wasn't meant to be.
Yeah.
And we do like get like right after we see like right after Peter sees MJ and kissing some other guy who turns out to be Jameson's son. He just takes out his frustration while swinging through the city, and while he's swinging, I mean, his powers start to fail on him. And at first, I remember seeing this in theaters. I was like, "Oh no, he stopped." I mean, he lost his web powers. I mean, like, what happened? And we do get this one comedic moment with him and this one guy in the elevator, and I like it a tad bit more in the extended cut, but I mean, I really like how it's handled nonetheless. I mean, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, I can agree. Sometimes I like look at that scene and I think it is funny, but sometimes I just wonder, like, was it really necessary, or is it just meant for, like, comedy? But either way, I very much enjoy it. It's like if you went to a cosplay event and you look to your left or your right and there's someone in an outfit and you just...
Yeah, I mean,
you love it.
Yeah, I mean, he can't tell if it's an actual Spider-Man. I mean, if it's actually Spider-Man or just some guy in a really convincing cosplay version of Spider-Man.
Yeah, I mean, either way, it's interesting. It's very nice.
Yeah. When it came to that one scene, however, it proves that Sam Raimi is good at blending action, horror, drama, and comedy all into like one package. I mean, and this film really captures that. I mean, his direction, and I really loved what Sam Raimi managed to do for this film, and I really have a lot of respect for him for that.
Me
and
too.
Yeah. Then after that, I mean, we get that one moment when with Peter trying to call MJ and explain why he wasn't there for the play, and even trying to tell her that he's Spider-Man and why he can't be with her, why he can't be with MJ, and it's really heartbreaking, and you really feel sorry for him. And then we get to the scene with Otto trying to demonstrate his fusion reactor, and he uses these... Oh my god. These still look cool even to this day, his mechanical arms, and they still hold up even to this day. I mean, sometimes, they're used practically, and sometimes they would be doubled in CG. And you can tell in certain scenes which is practical and which is CG, and they look beautifully awesome even to this day.
Yes, I can definitely agree with that. Personally, when I first saw that scene in theaters or just in general, every time when Otto puts the arms on, it's a very interesting process.
Yeah, especially when the syringe is hooked into his cerebellum. And that was just that's the one moment that made me ugh, because I'm not a fan of needles.
Yeah, me either. But right after that, as the arms start to wake up, for lack of a better phrase, they pretty much start to change form, open up, and you get this grand musical, just epic moment where the arms come to life, and you just cannot believe how realistic it looks. It's it's
amazing. And he starts up his fusion reactor, which is basically recreating the power of the sun, and of course it goes critical, and it starts causing a lot of damage, and even kills his wife in the process. So Peter comes in as Spider-Man to shut the experiment down, but not before a beam of the reactor damages the inhibitor chip and right next to Otto's neck. I mean, that prevents the arms from controlling his mind. Yeah. And speaking of which, I mean, the arms also have artificial intelligence. And since the inhibitor chip is destroyed, it leads to probably the most terrifying scene in the film, and that is, of course, the hospital scene right when the surgeons are trying to remove the arms from Otto. And this scene is pretty much filmed like a horror movie. And we know Sam Raimi's experience with horror films, especially if you watch films like Evil Dead or, say, Drag Me to Hell. And he really, like, dibs that into this scene. And I'm just like, yeah, this is filmed pretty much like Evil Dead, except without demons or anything like that. And I'm just like, yeah, I mean, it creeped me out a bit as a kid, but I mean, it really demonstrates what Otto is capable of if he really allowed himself to be, like fully be taken by his dark side.
Yeah, I personally was also pretty scared of that as a kid because one minute everything's fine, the next they just plain go haywire.
Yeah.
The arms themselves were used for the sole purpose of the experiment to contain successful nuclear fusion. The idea was to create an invention that would help humanity with a safe, renewable energy, cheap electricity for everybody, and very reliable. That was the whole point of the experiment in the previous scene. But at the same time,
they can also be used as weapons.
Precisely, because when the inhibitor chip was destroyed, the AIs in the arms became sentient, and they started acting on their own.
Yeah.
So while Otto was asleep, they defended themselves when they were about to be cut off, and that's why most of the
rather intensively, if I may say so myself, because that one hospital scene is just like, good God. Yeah. And it freaked me out as a kid, and it's still like, good Lord, I can't believe they actually did that. And I really like what Sam Raimi managed to do with that one scene, and it's easily one of the, like the best introductions to a supervillain in a Marvel film, in my opinion.